following interview with Mr. Orville Rodifer. Mr. Rodifer is a very significant person in the Muncie local community and also in the history of Local 287 and the labor movement in general in this community. 35 as a very young man, and I'm almost tempted to say that he's still a very young man, but he certainly gives that impression. He's very active even today. He's a member of the city council. He has held many offices in the union as an employee of Warner Gear. He has held the presidency and numerous other positions. He has held several offices in the county and in the community in addition to his present position as a member of the city council. Suppose we begin, Orville, if I may call you that, and I've known you, as you know, for a very long time. When I was a very young man, we worked together in the shop. And let me begin by you. What else have you held in Local 287 at Warner Gear?
Well, Dan, I held several offices, as you stated. I served as, well, to start with, I served as guide. I served as vice president. I served as trustee, and also as president of my local union.
All right, these positions are all on the executive board.
Yes, these positions were all on the executive board. However, then I have served as a delegate to the competitive shop, and for several years to the Regional 3 District Auto Council, which consists of Kentucky and Indiana.
Just for the record, what is the Competitive Shop Council?
The Competitive Shop Council, I was just a delegate for a very short time, one term, and they make a study of the wage structure in the various plants in UAW. Might give this for an example. As far as the type of work within these plants, or jobs similar, what was the base rate, and the thing that the council tries to do is try to work out a structure of jobs parallel in wages. In other words, in your base pay.
Try to make certain that the Warner Gear base pay for a gear cutter, for example, is not significantly below or above what it would be at Detroit Gear if it is such a...
That's right.
Or another competitive shop.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Now, in addition to these various positions that you have held in Local 287, you've been a very active man also in the community. I remember that you almost always played a leading role in Labor Day Parade and other community civic fairs. Suppose you tell us a little bit about Orville Rodifer's participation in community affairs outside the labor movement, or outside Local 287, let's put it that way.
Dan, the way I became interested in community activities, such as you have stated, Labor Day, for an example, I became aware of the need in the community for such activities. And labor gave me the chance of being able to show a certain amount of ability, perhaps in certain promotional lines, such as the development of a parade and the program for Labor Day, which then I got the opportunity of serving in the capacity of developing 4th of July celebrations, of working on for groups like the Merchants Association for their Christmas parade, working for the such organizations as the veterans for an example, then in 1953, I was selected as a non-veteran, as a National Parade Chairman of the 1953 National Land Convention Parade in Indianapolis. I also worked with the Moose organization on their zone parade set, the same thing as the Eagles Lodge. I also have worked with the VFW in their state convention parade. We'll work next year with the Veterans of Foreign Wars in their state convention parade. I have worked with the American Legion in their parade. And so you see, also, Dan, I worked on as the parade marshal and chairman of the Muncie Fair Centennial Parade.
When was
a few
that?
years ago. I'm trying to recollect the exact date, and I'm very hazy on it. It's some 6 or 7 years ago. And then about 3 years ago, we had the Muncie Centennial, which I served as co-chairman, along with Mr. Ed Petty of the Ball Stores, of the Muncie Centennial, celebrating the 100 years for the city of Muncie.
Well, I don't know whether there's any relationship or not, but it struck me when you showed me a newspaper a while ago where the Labor Day parade had been, there was an ad in the newspaper supported by the local merchant telling about the Labor Day parade, and you were marshal. And now you've just pointed out that you were either marshal or active in helping plan the merchant's Christmas parade. When was that now? Very recently?
No, this has been...
In the 1950s?
This has been a few years ago.
Well, but the striking thing is...
late 40s.
All right, and in the late 30s, Local 287 had a strike. And the Chamber of Commerce paid for a full-page ad in the Muncie Star telling, in effect, what a pitiful thing it was that Local 287 and the UAW had the workers out of the shop, and that Warner-Gear was going to leave Muncie, and the shop was closed down, and business would be severely hurt in this community if something wasn't done to prevent the union from keeping Warner-Gear's employees from working. And this was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. Now, it seems to me that you must have come a long way to establish the kind of rapport and mutual respect and working relationship that you evidently have today with the merchants and businessmen of this community. Would you comment on that?
Yes, and I'd be happy to comment on that. There are, I'd say, several of us in our local union who strive and have went out of their way to try to work with the community.
Carl Rutherford's one of those persons. Evidently.
Well, yes, I'm one of them. There's many more. Fellows that work in the various groups that I have mentioned previously are very dedicated men in church work, in the fraternal organizations, and veteran organizations. They're very dedicated men. The thing I'm trying to say is that we had to prove to the city and to the people of our community that we were citizens first. However, we are union men. We believe in it. We believe what it stands for, and we knew that the organization wasn't here to hurt our community. There was a need because of certain conditions within the plant, because of wage structures, because of the things that is necessary for a laboring man to have to raise a family, to put his children through school, and even as far as through college. We had to have an organization. First of all, Dan, in my opinion, and I've said this before, the union are many organizations. They don't call themselves a union, but I would imagine, as far as the business people are concerned, that they are a union. For example, the Bar Association, your doctors, they all have an organization. Maybe they don't call a union, but in my opinion, they are organized the same as we in the union to protect our interests as a laboring man. They are organized in their own sense to protect their interests, and which this is good. So, in other words, we, in our own way, had to prove to our community that we were of some value other than just being union guys, in other words.
I see. Well, I think evidently you've made grand strides in that direction when you can have people coming up through the labor movement such as Paul Cooley and Orville Rodifer and Charlie Weeks and many other prominent men, George Stevenson, who have been elected to public office both in the city and the county and also on the state level.
Oh yes, we've had many more. You mentioned a few names.
Yes, I've omitted many more.
We've had, yes, you have. And maybe we couldn't name them all.
Oh, I named some.
We've had Walter Claspel, that served as a state representative.
He was a Republican, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a Republican.
Fine.
And we had Sheriff
Pete Anthony?
Pete Anthony was a
Is he
member
still living,
of our local. No, Pete is not still living.
He was a Republican also.
He was a Republican.
Uh-huh.
Of course, we have been accused of being.
What was Pete's real name, do you know?
No,
I mentioned him in the...
I can't. Actually, Pete is about all I ever knew him by, and many other people.
Right.
It was the same way that.
All right. That's all right. Go ahead.
Lefty Thomas served as commissioner.
County commissioner.
From our local, yes. And we've had many other people in the county that has served on township advisory boards, which I had served in Center Township Advisory Board. We had many other members of our local that had served on school boards, on local school boards in the county. Now, this is a little different setup from the city.
Joe Douglas.
Joe Douglas turned as a school board member, as a
Gene
city
Clark,
councilman.
at one time a union steward.
Gene Clark at one time was a member of our local, and he served as on the school board, and I believe one time
City council, I believe.
he served as the president of the school board at one time. Also, he served as on the city council.
I
Yes,
believe he did.
he did. He definitely served on the city council, and in fact, Gene Clark, before he went into supervisory, which of course there's some disagreement among a lot of people, but man, actually, I would rather see our members become supervision. I think, although we have problems, I still think they have a little more clear understanding of our problems. However, you still have to negotiate your problems and this sort of thing. But I still, perhaps I'm a little different from somebody else. Even one of our own members, I still would rather perhaps they step up in supervisor capacity other than going out on the street or out of the city. And I feel it's somewhat this way. Perhaps I'm speaking out of turn.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely.
As far as schools are concerned, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but this is what I feel.
No, I think you're quite right, and I don't know how many people would agree with you, but I think it's commendable that Warner Gear as a company. And another thing that I have observed, Orville, is that the employees of Warner Gear, the active labor leaders, are intensely loyal to Warner Gear. And I think they appreciate the fact that Warner Gear evidently does not discriminate against former union officials when it comes time for promotion, or union active members. And Gene Clark is an example, and I worked for Gene, and Gene and I are good friends, and I also, of course, had an occasion from time to time when I was a member of the negotiating committee to take a grievance that had come from one of the stewards from one of the departments and go in and talk with Gene about it. And Gene and I didn't always agree, but we still have retained tremendous mutual respect, I'm sure. And I think that probably a large percentage of the supervisors at Warner Gear up to the top hierarchy have come up through the ranks. And they have at one time or another been members of Local 287. Is that a fair statement, do you think?
I would think this is a fair statement. There are certainly, yes, there's held top jobs that that were members of Local 287, yes.
I understand Porter Hedges now is on supervision.
This is right.
He was a former committeeman, and I'm quite sure there would be others. Bob Murphy for a while was on supervision, and I'm sure if we thought about it, we could name others.
There are many more.
Yes, I'm sure there are. Well, Orlo, let me go back to the 1930s, 1935, when I was still a very small boy in school, and ask you to recall for me, as nearly as you can, the kinds of conditions that prevail at Warnegers that encourage the workers to organize a labor union. First, they attempted, I think, to organize the mechanics union, and then there was the company union, then referred to as company union, employees association, and then finally Local 287 and the UAW-CIO. Now, would you relate for me, as well as you can remember, the kind of working conditions, or grievances, or pay circumstances, or managerial attitudes toward the workers, or whatever it may have been, that encouraged the workers to organize a labor union?
Well, Dan, left to my knowledge and recollection, as you say, it's been a long time. However, in those days, there was no such thing as paid holidays or vacation with pay or any type of insurance. We, at that time, worked now, as we do now, on what we call a group system, and the company expected you to put so much out and come around and sometimes count your work, how many points did you make today, or sometimes you was lucky if you made 60, 70, 80 points an hour, and you were paid every 2 weeks. In other words, I took home pay for 2 weeks was around $31 to $33, and that was working on the midnight shift, which there was no bonus in those days for a midnight shift. There were no privilege such as now that you can, if you want to, you could smoke a cigarette or this sort of thing. There wasn't this type of thing back in those days.
Or to show the contrast, every 2 weeks you drew about $33, give or take a dollar. So
that's right.
Approximately, how much would your earning capacity be in 1969 for 2 weeks' pay?
In 2 weeks' pay, probably $300.
8 to 10 times as much.
8 to 10 times as much.
Has the cost of living gone up that much?
Dan, that's a hard question.
Well, it's your standard of living now.
My standard of living, I will say this, is better. Certainly. Our standard of living is better.
All right. Now, in addition to that, in addition to the fact that your base pay has gone up at least 800%, or what it was in 1935. In addition to that, you have several other gains that you have made over the years as a member of Local 287 and employee of Warnegers. Would you relate some of those?
Oh, yes, Dan. For example, like I said a moment ago, in those days it was vacation. Now we get a yearly, we get a bonus yearly. Well, this is to be used for vacation purposes. Mm-hmm. On top of that, which I never thought we'd see, now we get a Christmas bonus, which I think is a wonderful thing. We have, I think, a fine insurance.
Paid by the company?
Our insurance is paid by the company. Of course, this is a matter of negotiation, and part of, as you well know, part of the agreement or part of the settlement that is out of, for instance, if there's so much to be negotiated, they call it a package, in other words. Say if it's a 30-cent package or 20, whatever it is. And of course, this comes out of this package to help pay the expenses of the insurance. And we have a retirement program. This, of course, is a great thing to me. This retirement program, we have many people who have retired, and of course we work and want to strive to make it better, but this was unheard of in those days, such a thing as a retirement program for the members of our local union. And we have many other fringe benefits. For example, now we have and have had for a few years, such we didn't have in those days, Coke machines, milk machines, this sort of thing, which in those days they weren't there, and they are now. I don't know why our groups are paying, of course, paying better. They've negotiated year in, year out to make our group system, our points higher. Of course, I would say this, it's still the, in my opinion, still the old battle of that you have to stay in there and to keep what you got.
What was the weekly, what was the work week in 1935? 40 hours?
Well, yes, Dan, when I went in 35, it was 40 hours.
If you worked overtime, did you get?
Oh no, Dan, that's a very good point. If you asked, no, if we worked overtime, there was no premium pay. Now, of course, if you work on a Saturday, it's time and a half. If you work on Sunday, it's double time. And I've never had a big holiday triple time. This is what I understand. I never got any of that.
You have holiday vacations out there?
Oh yes, we have around 8 or 9 holidays, paid holidays now, which was unheard of in those days.
Full pay for those days?
Yes. Well, it's set up full pay. Yes. I would say it that way.
Probably 152 points instead of
no, I think it's around. I thought it was 137.
Well, whatever it would be. It would be.
Well, it's a full day.
At least the minimum rate that you would earn.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm. Orville, when did you become a member of Local 287? Were you a charter member?
No, I can't say I was exactly. No, I wasn't a charter member, but I became a member in 1937.
The same year it was organized.
The same year it was organized, and I will not forget the day I was sworn in at the city garage on Hoyt Avenue, and John Barty from the International Union.
I talked to John a couple of weeks ago.
You did?
Yes, he did.
Fine man.
Interesting fellow, very
And
fine.
he's the man that I remember that gave us the obligation that particular day.
32 years ago.
Yes.
What did it mean to you to become a member of a labor organization?
Well, Dan, that's somewhat of a hard question in a way. It gave me a sense of, I think, of a sense of freedom. It gave me something to, maybe I would put this way, something to lean on. Someplace that I could be heard. For example, if I had a grievance or whatever my problem might be, instead of taking it directly to the foreman, I had an organization. I could go to my steward, take my problem to the committee, which it was necessary to negotiate with top management. So it gave me a sense of security and a sense of freedom, which a moment ago you said are gains which I talk about security, I mean seniority, which is a great thing. There's been a lot of talk here. Sometimes the younger men, I think, Dan, there needs to be a process of a great educational program amongst our youngsters to understand that as far as seniority is concerned, regardless of what you think, you're going to get older day by day. And I think that the younger people sometimes maybe feel like I did a few years ago. Perhaps you're not going to get older, but you do. And they, of course, have a feeling you're young and they're full of energy, and they last stages of the last few years have been, I would say, fairly good and decent for the coming generation as far as working conditions and other things is concerned, because when we organized, we had come out of a depression. We had some understanding of what it meant to try to get together, to be together. But sometimes I think people, the more they get, the more they want, they don't want to stay closely together. And I think there's a great need of an educational program of getting together. I'm trying to put it in a different term.
All right, let me ask you this. Was part of the feeling of security a feeling of belonging, camaraderie, comradeship, or whatever you want to call it? Some of the fellows, Paul Cooley, for example, had mentioned this. Some of the fellows have, he is one. That there's a very strong feeling of brotherhood, or whatever you want to call it. You feel that now you really belong, and this fellow is looking out for your interest, and he will support you if you have a legitimate complaint, if you're laid off out of turn, or if you're somehow discriminated against, or if you get hurt and you need assistance or something. That you have not only a union to lean on, but the people are the union. And there is this feeling. It seems to me, the people I've talked with, fellows, the old-timers who organized the union, even though they competed for office for the next 30 years, in many instances, at least for 20, 25 years, these fellows now have almost they have a very reverent feeling toward one another. And they have a feeling of love and respect and brotherhood, I think. For the fellows, they always say nice things about them. They'll say, boy, this fellow, I certainly disagreed with him, but he did a tremendous amount of good for the union. And now I wonder if this, first of all, you agree that prevailed back in the 1930s?
I definitely agree that, and I wonder if...
How does it prevail today? And I think this is the point you were getting at.
Yes, I don't think it prevails as much today as it did back in those days.
What does the labor union mean to a young man who goes to work at Warnegere in the 1960s? Does it mean the same thing that it meant to you gentlemen who organized it in the 1930s?
I don't believe so, because I think it's a lack of understanding.
It stood for you, it stood for hope, aspiration, promise, fellowship, and a lot of other things. But today, it may, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I don't know, I haven't talked to very many young fellows, but it may be that it stands for material security, and maybe they're not entirely certain that it's necessary for that. I don't know.
Well, Dan, that's, of course, that's a hard question to answer. In reality, I have raised 4 boys, 1 girl. I've raised 4 boys. And, of course, they now are in the armed forces of our country. But Dan, the change is not, I don't only think in labor movement, I think it's a change in our entire system, perhaps not system either, Dan, But I think as a professor yourself, a teacher, who deals with the younger people in the school age, that you recognize that there is a change in attitude.
It comes with absolutely.
Right. And I'm not trying to put the blame on them. I think circumstances are prevalent. I think circumstances create these situations. That's the reason I said a moment ago, I think things have really been pretty good for them. And back in those days, we were struggling to organize. We had a ideal and a reason and a purpose. Of course, now we are organized. Of course, they themselves don't understand that these problems will continue regardless of time period, that these problems of the working man, day in and day out, will prevail as long as he is a working man working in an industry, regardless of whether it's the type of machinery that is installed, which sometimes eliminates manpower, modern machinery. I believe it's the times, and I don't think they've had to experience it, and it's an awful hard question to answer, and as an educator, I'm quite sure you're aware of it.
Yes, I think that I would most certainly agree with you, and I agree with you entirely that as human beings, they're not, of course, intrinsically different from what you and I were or what our grandparents were, but the conditions are so different that it's difficult for them to understand and to appreciate the attitudes that grew out of a different set of circumstances, a different generation.
That's right.
Now, does this pose a problem for the future of the labor movement, Orville?
I definitely believe that it does. However, I believe with a proper type of educational program, well, for an example, such as yourself, who's taking the time out to talk to individuals in a local union, for example, a small local union, when you yourself know there are many local unions in the United States that are much larger than Local 287. But such men as you, educator, taking the time out to talk to men who have spent their life, better than half their life, in the shop and in the union, through the type of tapes, materials, and I believe this might help. I also think it must be brought to the attention of the younger men, but that it's a hard thing to do, and there's going to have to be a way found how to get to them, which yourself, again, I keep repeating educator, but I'm doing it for purpose, finding ways to communicate with the younger people. They say there's a breakdown in communication. I'm not so sure of that. I think I don't think it's a breakdown in communication. I think it's time. I think we're going through a period of time that is making it most difficult, and I think that things have moved so fast in the last few years. It's pretty hard for a man such as myself that's raised a family sometimes to cope with these situations. So I think what you're doing is going to help be the answer of educating our younger men in the plants, in the colleges, where they've got a better understanding for what type of individuals makes up a local union. This is it has to be through some type of educational program, Dan. I know yourself that you, a few years ago, along with Jim Bayless, was very interested in education in our local union. And it's a great thrill to me to see you back in Muncie after those years, still interested, and still, you yourself are still groping for a way out to help us as a union and help other people, not only the younger but the older people, to understand it. Do that, and then you, I think education is all I have to say to you, and you know what that requires.
Well, Orville, I appreciate those kind remarks. When I worked at Werniger, I think when I was about 22, probably 21, I was on the Education Committee, chairman at 22, and then on the committee at 23 or so. I looked around and I saw the conditions, and I had some pretty good instructors, such as Orville Rodifer and Jim Bayless and Jack Reed and some of the old timers, and it wasn't easy to escape. And you folks were still, you were not missionaries perhaps, but you were still very definitely interested in passing the traditional laws. And I appreciated the opportunity to learn as much as I could about this very significant phase of American history, the labor movement. It's a very integral part, probably as much the critical main thread of American history as you're likely to find, because America, as you know, was settled by working class people primarily, probably 95%. And if America stands for anything, it has always stood for the dignity of labor and honest work, and the theory that if a man is willing to work hard and to make his contribution, then he will be duly rewarded by his society. And as I understand it, this is what the labor movement was organized for, was to make sure that that heritage and that tradition was perpetuated and passed on down.
Dan, you made one statement that I should have made, and you brought the word out, which, when you asked me a question some moments ago, what did it mean to me as an individual? How did I feel? It brought dignity to me. Now, when you say dignity, some of us people working in the organized labor movement are out in among the people and out in the city and in the county working on all these types of programs. It is for the very purpose of bringing dignity to the laboring man. So the union has given me dignity. And this I'm very glad to hear you say the word dignity, because it's the union to me has brought dignity. And when I'm out on a job, for an example, such as a program as the Armed Forces Day program, which I have, we've had a program since 1950. I served with 2 years as Brigade Marshal, and since 1952 have served as General Chairman of the Armed Forces. Then this program is for the very purpose of honoring the members of our armed forces throughout the world, and doing this type of program to me brings dignity to the working man and to my local union. I say my local union. I've been criticized sometimes for that, Dan, but sometimes this is the way you state it.
Oh,
you don't
sure.
mean yours, but you know.
It
You
shows
understand
that
one.
you belong to it, it belongs to you.
Dan, I wonder if I have they mentioned the first president of our local union?
Yes, Wilbur Coons.
Wilbur Coons.
This has been mentioned. If you'd like to say something about him, though, it's quite all right. Go ahead and comment.
Well,
if you'd like to.
There are two men, and as far as going back, a few men that I can recall back in the early history of the local that I had a great feeling for. I didn't know him too well. I wasn't too close to him. I was really young, as you said you were when you came into the local years ago. But Wilbur Kuntz, to me, was a very dedicated man, and I thought did a tremendous job in organization.
I never met him. I understand he's dead now.
Yes, he is. Now, there's another name I don't think has been mentioned, but I think I'd be derelict in my duties in not naming a gentleman who did not belong to our organization, but who did assist in the early days. And there's a little history behind this man, and he was Clark Johnson. Now,
No, I don't think I've heard that name.
Clarky Johnson was the president of the Central Labor Union body at that particular time, and was disagreed with by some of the membership of the central body because he urged the organization of industrial unions such as Local 287, UAW-CIO in those days. Clarky Johnson was a great labor man. He is a printer. He's still living, and he's still a printer. Lives a quiet life as a printer. He's a linotype repairman.
Does he live in Muncie?
He lives in Muncie. Clark Johnson, one time at the request of some labor people, ran for mayor. However, he was unfortunate, and he was defeated. Well, this, of course, Dan, was my first interest in the politics.
When was that? Do you remember?
In 1938. I do remember that. I might put
Well, being a history teacher, you know, I have to stick in a date here somewhere.
I might put it kind of funny in a way because I was never in politics. I didn't know a precinct committeeman from a governor in those days, but I have learned over the
Well, you were pretty
past
young in
few years.
1938, just
Yeah.
getting started.
Just getting started. But I did think that to mention his name because he was an early part.
Did he have the same job that Leland Fisk has?
No, well, yes, of course, yes. In those days, it was called the Central Labor Union, which was the old AF&L-CI organization. In those days, they were the craft unions, in other words.
Well, now, did he have that job before Local 287 was organized?
Oh, yes, he had that job before Local 287.
Well, then really he was president of the old craft organization.
That's right. That's
Paul
what
Cooley talked about a while ago.
Oh, yes, yes.
Then he kept it after you were organized for a while.
Well, for a while, but not too long.
Well, now this man sounds like someone that might be interesting to talk to. Do you know this man?
I certainly do.
Would you be kind enough to call him for me? I know this is asking for a favor. And open the door and see if he is still well enough and willing to talk with me. And I'd just be delighted to call him then and make an appointment and go down to Central Sidewalk.
I'd be happy to try, and whether you would do this now, but I'd make the try for you, Dan.
Yeah, this would be quite interesting for the students. Now, you know, I told you informally, and I haven't put it on the tape yet, but these tapes are going to be kept in Ball State University Library, and they'll be available to students who are interested in the labor movement or in the community history of Muncie for hopefully many years to come. And a good friend of mine, the viewers, Dr. Everett Farrell, who's chairman of the history department, is quite interested in getting this collection. And I think it'd be most helpful to the students if we could go all the way back and get this very significant individual whom you've named. And you're the first person that I have encountered that has named this man. And it seems to me to be someone that, as you point out, was quite instrumental in the early phases of organizing unions here, industrial unions here in Muncie.
Well, yes, of course, he was, as I say, he was somewhat criticized by
AFL, probably. I mean, this would be
but he was a real fine union man, and he fought back in the sense that he felt that the industrial workers had a right to an organization also, and he was
many AFL labor leaders did not share that point of view.
That's correct. Many of them did not share that view. Some of the names I can't recall. It's been quite quite a few years ago.
Well, I'm not sure that Donkus did, and I'm not sure that Green did.
That's correct. And I'm quite sure you've got this from other sources as to the feelings of some of those people from other members of the local union. Have you talked with LaRue Leonard?
Yes, I have. I had a very interesting talk with LaRue and also with John Barkey. They were kind enough to come to Muncie, and we talked for 2 hours on tape, and I have an appointment to go back and talk with John Barkey again. But they were extremely helpful and very informative. This gentleman, Clark Johnson, is that the name?
Clark F. Johnson.
Clark F. Johnson. Would seem to be someone who might very well have some material, maybe newspaper clippings or correspondence or something. In the very
This I don't know.
embryonic stages of
I haven't talked with Clarky. I call him Clarky for quite some time. However, I do know that he probably carries in his head a world of knowledge as far as the labor movement is concerned. And the only reason I mention the name is because of the fact that that he did play some part in help rolling the boulders aside so that our local union could be in the city of Muncie. I think perhaps you're aware that it wasn't all roses, that there were even problems that had to be worked out with the city government and this sort of thing.
What do you remember about that?
Well, then, as of course,
You remember the city government? No.
I can't recall too much about it because I was young, and I became a member, and I really didn't become. I became fascinated. The reason I became fascinated with the local union was by a talk. And the reason I mentioned Johnson's name, Clark's name, because the fact in Deacon Park, he made a talk, and of what a union was, of what it stood for. And I definitely made up my mind that I was going to try to be a good union man, a good union person, and a good citizen after hearing this man talk.
That was Clark.
And this was Clark. And he was not a member of our international staff. He, of course, then was the president of the Central Labor Union.
About what year was that? Do you have any idea?
It was around in early 1937. 1937. But he talked, I heard this talk in Deacon Park. And I made up my mind that he knew what he was talking about as far as unions, as far as the need of a working man, and why we had to have a union so that we could do better, not only in the shop, so we would have enough money to take care of our family, and this type of thing that we've discussed. And he is one of the men, I'd say, that helped sell me on unionism, on what it really means.
Well, that's wonderful, and I hope that it's possible for me to talk with this gentleman. And again, I'll really be grateful if you'll give this man a call, since you have known him. And
I'll
if you can open the door. If you can, give me a buzz and let me know, and I'll be happy to
I'll try to do
talk
that.
with him. This would be, I think, something that the labor movement would need on record before this man, while he's still living and still in the community.
This is right. Many times people are forgotten over the years. And of course, many times a person comes a little controversial over things, and sometimes things happen to people to take them out of the framework. Then over the few years, in the past few years, these little things that these people have done have been forgotten. And I'm quite sure this is why you're trying to write the history, and some of the things that you want are maybe some of these little things that haven't even been touched on. And there might be other people involved, somebody else might have a name for you. But this is, as I say, this is one man I remember. Some of them probably have told you of some of the, when I wasn't one of the first members, some of the names of the internationals. I remember John Barty, of course. He's the man that gave us the application. But there are other names you probably have gleaned from some of our other members who were the charter members.
Merrill Snyder, Ralph Fisher.
Oh, Ralph Snyder, Merrill Fisher, Barney Black.
Now, Barney, I haven't been able to get hold of. Is he living in Muncie?
Barney, I think, lives outside, not too far. I don't know exactly where it is. We can find out, though.
I
You
appreciate
haven't been
that.
able to get in touch with Barney?
Well, I haven't been able to find him.
Of course, Ralph Smith, of course, the big fellow. You remember Ralph, 300 pounds. You should have remembered.
Yeah.
He was a trustee, of course, Ralph.
Yes, I do.
Ralph's dead.
Yes.
And we have many of our members who, by the way, as a little light, do you remember the Ford brothers, Early Ford and the little, of course, Ernie's dad, as you well know. And those are names that of people that you've come in contact with and even had a little fun out of because you know them. There are many other names, probably that, for example,
Claude, is it Bechtel?
Claude Bechtel was, of course, a steelworker. I'm trying to think of Carl Parker, for example.
Carl is dead now.
Carl is dead. Was an international rep for a good many years, as was Louis Leonard, and as was Lefty Thomas. Those men. Of course, you should talk to Merrill Snyder.
I have.
You have talked to Merrill.
He's been very helpful.
He's a very fine man.
Yes, he is.
Very fine man. There are many other people. Of course, when you group for names, sometimes they leave you, Dan. I think you know this.
Well, of course that's so, and I'm always embarrassed when I'm getting to say something. I meet a student, I'm not quite sure whether I taught them in junior high school or in high school or in college in New York or California or Florida or Indiana. And this is sometimes embarrassing. This doesn't belong on the tape, but I was at New York University a couple of summers ago studying college and university administration. And I walked down the sidewalk, and there was some very attractive young girl in her early 20s kept coming toward me with a nice, pleasant smile on her face. And in New York City, around Greenwich Village, why, you're not quite sure, this would cost you money. So I tried to shy away, and she kept coming toward me, and she said, "Excuse me, don't I know you?" And being someone not accustomed to a big city, why, I stopped rather hesitantly, and said, "Well, perhaps so." And she said, "Aren't you from Miami, Florida?" And I said, "Yes, I have been for many years. I lived here." And she said, "You taught my mother." And her mother had been in one of my history classes, and this young lady had been a student at the University of Florida, and she had visited my class with her mother, who at the time was probably in her late 40s, early 50s, and she had remembered me. I was quite favorably impressed, of course, that the young lady remembered me, but I was surprised to see her half dozen seats away, and yet here's someone who'd been in one of my classes. But I can't remember names either, Orville. Now, Dr. Farrell, I think he remembers the name of every student he ever had. It's incredible.
I think one of the greatest men, and I say this for a reason, and I think there's many people, even Christian pagan, would know who I mean. When I said talking about names, when I was a boy, H.A. Pettyjohn.
Oh, yes, I remember him. He used to come around and teach us Bible.
That's right, and he could remember more names than any Christian I know of. He was a great one for that.
Yes.
And many times Betty has talked to me about the label meaning of what it means, and got to talk to other fellows. He got a different insight on what local unions meant, and he has a great number of his boys, as he calls it, such as Fred McMullen. I can name a lot of them. are members of our local that Petty John
Influence?
had.
It influenced them so much?
Had influenced these boys. He influenced a great numbers of men.
It was a wonderful fellow. He dedicated his entire life to helping boys.
That's right.
Well, what else, Orville, do you remember that impresses you as being one of the major events or interesting sidelines or prime achievements all local 287 at Warner Gear during your long career there?
I think one of the greatest things was when we signed our first contract.
When was that? Do you remember?
Yes. I can't give you the exact date.
Oh, well, you don't have to be.
However, I remember that we had a parade, and I never will forget it for this reason.
Were you marshal of that first parade, Orville?
Well, no, not exactly. I worked a little at it, but that's just when I became interested. I walked in it. But a few years later, and I can't recall that year, and it's a shame, we have won. We were out for a contract, and we went up, we had a parade, and I rode in I did marshal that one. And we had a lot of fun coming downtown and out land. And I rode in a horse and buggy with Big Fat Smith, who drove the buggy, and he weighed 300 pounds. So, you know, we had a lot of fun. We had several Labor Day celebrations in Muncie, several funny incidents that happened in those parades. And we not only had parades from here to the McCullough Park, we had parades from here to the fairgrounds, and we just had lots of fun doing it. And we had governors and senators. And
although you've met some pretty important people in your civic functions in the community, haven't you? You tell me some of the people you've met.
Well, pretty hard to.
Well, you don't have to remember all of them.
Well, I'll tell you one thing as far as important people, in my opinion, is concerned. It's, I have met senators such as Birch Bayh. In fact, of course, I worked for Senator Bayh before he was nominated and after for his election. Ben Carkey. Locally, I have known several mayors over the past few years. I worked with them on various occasions and programs. And I think one of the finest men that I've ever worked for with. He was a very community-minded man. He served, too, as a city councilman with Dr. Everett Farrell. I think he stands high, in my opinion, in this community. There's such men as I worked with, such men as Red Petty, the Ball Stores, and many others in this community. A.J. Pettyjohn had a great influence on me and on my life in this community. And I'm quite sure Ernest E. Bilby had a great influence on me that had the old, he's dead now, had the Coven Chorus, which Paul and I both sang in at one time, had a great influence on me. And he was a pretty good union man. By the way, he was a glass worker, and he directed the Coven Male Chorus, which several members of Local 287 sang in this large organization, Coven Chorus. I know perhaps I'm not answering your question.
No, that's quite all right. But the real thing I'm driving at here is, has your work as a member of Local 287 and your work in the community representing organized labor, has it enabled you to make contacts that have made it possible for you to be a member of the city government today, for example, that would not have been possible for a working man in the 1930s?
I definitely would say yes. I attribute and contribute.
Is what we're really saying, labor's become respectable, organized labor has become accepted by the community now, and it's become...
I would say definitely yes.
In other words, right now, the Chamber of Commerce, the NAM, the ELK, Lodge, various lodges, civic organizations, work with members of organized labor willingly and cooperatively and fraternally?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think they work in respect. Of course, I think they have a right and they do disagree on many things, which is their prerogative. But I think that we have gained a certain amount of respect for the various types of organizations. I think, of course, you know, Dan, and I know that they many times disagree on some of our programs.
Sorry to interrupt, Orville. I'm going to have to stop here. The tape's coming to an end. And I really do appreciate the opportunity of having a chance to talk with you during this hour. The tape will be placed on reserve at Ball State University Library, and it will be available to future students of history of the labor movement and of the local community of Muncie, Indiana. Again, it's a real pleasure. You have added significantly to history, and I indeed am grateful. Thank you, Orville.